What if the most dangerous episode of television history wasn't lost, but hidden? Not destroyed, not erased by accident, not forgotten in some dusty archive, pulled, locked away, silenced for more than half a century. For 55 years, one episode of The Twilight Zone existed like a rumor. Fans whispered about it. Bootleg copies passed quietly between collectors. Some believed it had been exaggerated. Others thought it must have been truly offensive if a network chose to pretend it never existed. Then, decades later, it resurfaced, uncut, unapologetic, still unsettling. The episode was called The Encounter, and the story behind why it vanished may be more disturbing than the story it told. To understand how a 25-minute black and white television episode could become one of the most suppressed entries in American TV history, we have to step back into a time when television was both entertainment and battleground. Entering the Zone, a show that said what others couldn't. When The Twilight Zone premiered on October 2nd, 1959, television was safer, cleaner, predictable. Sitcom families solved problems in 30 minutes. Western heroes wore white hats. Morality was clear. Good and evil were easy to spot. Then came Rod Serling. Serling had served in World War II. He had seen real horror, combat, death, the chaos of human cruelty. When he returned home and began writing for television, he quickly discovered something else. Truth was harder to show on American screens than fiction. In 1956, Serling wrote a teleplay inspired by the lynching of Emmett Till. Network executives gutted it. The victim was changed, the setting altered, the racial truth erased. Sponsors were nervous. Southern affiliates threatened backlash. The story survived, but its meaning didn't. Serling learned a lesson. If you couldn't say something directly, you had to disguise it. And so, The Twilight Zone was born, not just as science fiction, but as camouflage. Aliens became metaphors for racism. Time travel exposed hypocrisy. Nuclear apocalypse revealed human selfishness. Monsters often turned out to be ordinary people. The format was radical for its time, an anthology series. No recurring cast, no ongoing storyline. Just a new world every week. A new moral puzzle. A new, uncomfortable question. And always Serling's voice, calm, measured, almost gentle. But beneath that calm was warning. The show emerged during the height of the Cold War. Americans were building bomb shelters while buying new cars. The Red Scare lingered. Nuclear anxiety hovered in the background of daily life. Patriotism was loud. Fear was louder. Serling used speculative fiction as a shield. Network censors were less likely to object to a story set on Mars, even if it was really about Alabama. Sponsors tolerated robots more easily than civil rights debates. For years, it worked, until it didn't. The episode that crossed the line. On May 1st, 1964, during the show's fifth and final season, an episode aired that would never be shown again for decades. Its title was simple, The Encounter. The episode is deceptively minimal. 2 men, 1 attic, a single room for the entire runtime. No special effects, no elaborate sets, no alien creatures or twisting timelines. Just conversation. At first glance, it seems harmless. A middle-aged World War II veteran named Fenton is sorting through old belongings in his attic. Among the clutter sits a samurai sword, a war trophy he claims to have taken from a Japanese soldier. A young Japanese-American man named Arthur arrives looking for work. Fenton offers him a drink. They talk. At first, it feels almost friendly, awkward but civil. Then something shifts. Fenton begins reminiscing about the war, about killing, about the sword. His tone grows sharper, more defensive. He tells stories that sound less like heroism and more like confession. Arthur stares at the sword with unsettling intensity, and then he says something that changes everything. His real name isn't Arthur. It's Taro, and his father, he claims, was a spy for Imperial Japan, someone who helped plan the attack on Pearl Harbor. The air in the attic tightens. What follows is not a supernatural showdown. There is no ghost, no visible monster, no confirmed curse. Instead, Paranoia creeps in. Fenton grows suspicious. Was this young man sent for revenge? Is he possessed by the spirit of the sword's original owner? Is the attic itself closing in on them? Arthur becomes volatile. He speaks of honor, of inherited guilt, of blood. The sword becomes more than metal. It becomes history. And by the end, violence erupts, not as spectacle, but as inevitability. Two men, both trapped, both shaped by war, both unable to escape what was done and what was believed. Why? It was too dangerous. The episode aired once. Immediately, complaints flooded CBS. Asian American advocacy groups were outraged at the suggestion that a Japanese American character's father had been a traitor. In 1964, the United States had not yet formally reckoned with the internment of over 120,000 Japanese Americans during World War II. Most of them were citizens. None were convicted of espionage. They were imprisoned because of their ancestry. To imply that disloyalty had existed, even in fiction, felt like reopening wounds that had never properly healed. At the same time, other viewers claimed the episode was anti-American. Fenton, the white veteran, is no hero. He admits to killing a possibly unarmed soldier. He is haunted, unstable, consumed by shame. There is no patriotic clarity, no moral reassurance, no comfortable resolution. And that may have been the real problem. Television, in 1964, preferred villains and heroes. Clear lines, clean endings. The Encounter offered none. So CBS made a quiet decision. When the series entered syndication, the episode was excluded. When home video releases came decades later, it was skipped. It did not appear in rerun marathons. It was simply absent. For over 50 years. The complicated truth at its center. What makes the episode even more layered is the actor who played Arthur, George Takei. As a child, Takei had lived in an internment camp. He remembered soldiers arriving at his family's home, remembered barbed wire, armed guards, his parents losing everything. He was 5 years old. That history shadows his performance. Whether viewers knew it at the time or not, the emotional undercurrent was real. In the episode, Arthur's confession about his father's espionage is never confirmed. It hangs in ambiguity. Is he telling the truth? Has he internalized blame? Is he confronting Fenton with a distorted version of history to force him to face his own guilt? Serling refuses to clarify. That ambiguity is the heart of the story. Both men are victims. Both men are aggressors. Fenton carries the trauma of war, but also the guilt of violence. Arthur carries the trauma of internment, but also the burden of inherited suspicion. The sword symbolizes more than a trophy. It represents violence passed down, history that refuses to stay buried, shame that mutates across generations. The attic becomes symbolic too, a cramped space filled with relics no one wants to examine closely. In many ways, the episode was not accusing one side. It was accusing war itself, and perhaps accusing the nation for what it chose to remember and what it chose to forget. The long silence. After 1964, the encounter faded into near myth. Some fans barely knew it existed. Others sought out rare recordings. Film historians debated whether it had truly been that controversial. Then, in 2016, something unexpected happened. The episode aired again during a marathon, uncut, no alterations. For the first time in 55 years, audiences saw it as originally intended. The response was not outrage. It was reflection. Viewers found it intense, uncomfortable, deeply psychological. Some called it one of the strongest episodes in the series. Time had shifted perspective. What once felt inflammatory now felt necessary. Why it matters now. The power of the encounter is not just historical. It feels contemporary. In recent years, anti-Asian hate crimes have surged. During the COVID-19 pandemic, Asian Americans were blamed, harassed, assaulted, treated once again as foreign threats regardless of citizenship or history. Fear found a target. History echoed. The dynamic between Fenton and Arthur doesn't feel trapped in 1964. It mirrors a pattern. Suspicion, scapegoating, inherited guilt, defensive nationalism. The episode forces a question that remains uncomfortable. How quickly does fear turn neighbors into enemies? Serling understood that trauma doesn't vanish just because time passes. It lingers. It mutates. It hides in cultural attics until something disturbs it. And unless it is confronted, it repeats. The U.S. government formally apologized for Japanese-American internment in 1988, over 4 decades after it occurred. Survivors received symbolic compensation. The apology acknowledged race prejudice, war hysteria, and a failure of political leadership. But apologies do not erase memory. Stories like the encounter keep memory alive. Not neatly, not comfortably, but honestly. Censorship then and now. The encounter was not the only episode removed from circulation. Other Twilight Zone entries vanished for legal disputes or licensing issues. But its disappearance stands apart because it wasn't about paperwork. It was about discomfort. And that debate continues today. Streaming platforms remove content deemed offensive. Audiences argue over cancel culture. Networks weigh artistic expression against public backlash. The central question remains the same. Who decides which stories survive? Serling once described his job as the art of self-censorship. He knew how often writers had to dilute their message to pass sponsor approval. Even within science fiction, he was walking a tightrope. The encounter may have stepped just slightly too far. But sometimes stepping too far is how art evolves. The Twilight Zone never really left. Modern shows like Black Mirror and Severance owe a clear debt to Serling's blueprint. They present familiar worlds, distort them slightly, and reveal uncomfortable truths. New revivals and adaptations continue to emerge. The hunger for morally ambiguous storytelling has not faded. It has intensified. Perhaps that is why the encounter feels less like a relic and more like a warning that arrived early. It asks questions we still struggle with. What does patriotism mean when history is complicated? Can trauma be inherited? Is silence safer than confrontation? And most importantly, what happens when we bury stories instead of facing them? For 55 years, one episode sat in the shadows. Now it stands as proof that difficult art doesn't disappear. It waits, and when the world is finally ready, it returns, not softened, not simplified, but still asking the same question Rod Serling posed decades ago. What kind of world are we building? Because somewhere between memory and denial, we may still be living in the Twilight Zone.